study innovations. So I'm currently rearranging my flat a bit and I decided that I need a new couch table. I've looked online and I've only found designs that are horribly boring or ridiculously expensive. So I decided I'm gonna make a project out of it. It's gonna be cheap, it's gonna be fun, and I'm gonna have something individual in the end. So I'm gonna grab a coffee and let's get to work. Okay, so here we see the parts for this build. The base is an IKEA lug table. Now it's not a very creative choice, but the design is so bland and simple that you can easily adapt it to anything. And the whole thing is based on a 5 centimeter grid, which means that you don't have to do a lot of math to make it all look fitting to each other in the end. Then I chose this plug. It has some mounting points on the back sides and USB plugs, so my guests can charge their smartphones and have them close to them while sitting on the couch. Plexiglass plate, very simple, bought it at Home Depot. We have LED strips, you know it from other DIY videos, nothing fancy in this build really. A drill, a jigsaw and a Japan saw, and I'm going to make a test which one is going to achieve the straighter cut. Masking tape, a cutter, a pen and a measuring device. So very simple, and it should be a relatively quick build as well. So I will start by marking in a rectangle 5 centimeters distance to all the edges. That way in the end the edges of the plexiglass element will align to the edges of the legs of the table. So I'm just gonna set this thing to 5 centimeters and as exactly as possible. And I'm just gonna mark 5 centimeters. Now I don't need to make the whole line because the masking tape I'm using is incidentally exactly 5 centimeters wide, so I'm going to use that. However, I'm also putting a small piece of tape just here in the center of the table. So I have a test area to test both of the saws and see which one works best. And if it gets a little bit unaligned, just pull it back off and align it with the markings. Now it doesn't really matter if you have some problems here with the tape because it's just gonna be here to protect this area, and if it's not exactly fitting with this edge, it doesn't really matter. But we just want to make sure that this edge is as straight as possible so that in the end it looks nice. I'm gonna continue by marking the other edges now. So on to testing both saws. I will just start with a cut from this cutter knife here to give the saw something to get a grip on in the beginning. On the other side I will just drill a hole so the jigsaw can get a good start. Nothing fancy. So let's start off with the jigsaw. Great coffee. And it made a small jump there and cut into the material, probably because of the filling on the other side. Oh, and it also went through to the bottom. So the jigsaw, not the best option. So let's see how I get along with this Japan saw. This doesn't work out at all. Oh no, I found a start there. And I think the trick is to not use any excessive amounts of force, really. Now look at that. Now I'm pretty happy with how straight the edge is, even though in the end I got a small curve in here, but also the masking tape not straight at this point anymore. Now I gotta say that this thing is really sharp. You really don't have to use much force. You basically let the thing cut by itself and depend on the sharpness of its blade, and oh my god, it's really, that actually cut into my finger. So yes, this looks better than the than the jigsaw, so I'm going to continue with that. Now to make this absolutely clear, you can absolutely use the jigsaw. You just need to use a smaller blade that doesn't cut through on the other side of the table. But I have this new tool and I want to play around with it, so I'm definitely going for the Japan saw this time. Now to start off, I'm gonna just drill some starting holes. And it's important to make sure that you're really not going over the edges here, otherwise you won't be able to fix it and it will look horrible. Also, I'm not going full precision on this build. So let's get to sawing. I slipped off here and it immediately created a horrible cut. Now it's not a problem here because this plate is going to be taken off anyways, but it reminds me to be careful not to slip off on the outer sides here. Now let's continue with the other edges. Now on to the next part. We are gonna try to pry this plate off the table. Okay, maybe if we're really careful. And there we go. Oh man, look at this piece of crap. And that's why it's so cheap. There's just a bunch of toilet paper on the inside. Since the sawing didn't cut the paper parts here up all the way to the bottom, I'm gonna take the cutter Always keep your workplace as clean and tidy as possible, right? So, anything else sticking out? I don't want this kind of stuff, it's ugly. So, here we go. Okay, now that we've taken the center plate out and removed the internals, the innards here, we can go on and adjust the cuttings in the edges, because obviously due to the drilling holes, the start of the cut isn't always directly on the line. So I'm gonna clean that up and see if it works. Careful, don't want to mess anything up right now. Just checking if I'm going over the edges or not. I'm not. This is actually looking good. And the way I do it right now is I'm just placing my finger here, because this is where the edge is actually properly aligned. So I'm going to keep the saw aligned to the proper edge and use that as a guide to cut this part out here. Here we go, perfect. And I can already say I'm a huge fan of this saw because it's so sharp, right? And this material is so flimsy and thin. I think if I had used the jigsaw, there would have been a lot more, cutouts and remains from the sawing process itself, because the saw blade will just rip everything out. And I mean, look at these edges; they are so clean. I'm almost gonna have to do no cleanup, maybe a little sandpaper, and then we're good to go. And I can also adjust these very small parts here pretty easily with the Japan saw. So let's go ahead. It's like a knife through butter. Awesome. Okay, so I picked some fine grain 240 sandpaper because the material is so soft. I'm hoping that this is the right one and I won't take forever to smooth it down. Okay, this looks very nice. If I need to do some further sanding down later on, I will do that, but I will first have to fit in the glass plate to see if this is okay like this or not. But it looks pretty smooth to me. I think we can go on like that. Okay, so the next part will be to cut the plexiglass plate. Alright, so in order to cut the plexiglass plate into the shape, we need to take measure, and it's not enough to rely on the raw mathematics, okay? I could say, well, it's a 90 by 55, I think, centimeters table. I can subtract 10 centimeters off each side, making it an 80 by 45 plate that I need. True, but I don't think the measurements of these IKEA tables are so precise, and neither is my cutting probably. So I'm gonna just make sure and measure 447 millimeters, and I'm gonna measure on multiple positions because the cuts may not be straight either, right? And 448 here as well. Okay, so I'm gonna go with 448 for the plate and have to sand this down later on just to make it fit, because I want a really good tight fit, right? Otherwise it may be wobbly or look shitty and stuff like that, and we don't want that. And here we have 797 as well. So these cuts are probably a bit better. I'm gonna have to write that down. I already forgot, of course. Okay, 448 and 787 or something. Alright, so I grabbed the pencil and wrote it on my hand, 797 and 448. Since this is a DIY video, I didn't want to do it all in a workshop, which I don't have, but I also didn't want to use like all these auxiliary tools you can have. I just wanted, to show you that you can do this by just taking the tools and use the table itself as a working surface as well. Okay, so this is why I assembled the table beforehand, and so far it works out nicely. However, I noticed that the table is not standing very stable. This is just probably a thing with this kind of product. Now I roughly lay the plate where it should end up in the end, so I can make sure I don't have a number mixed up in my measurement, and see if it roughly matches up with what I'm marking here. Because accidents happen. And that looks good. That looks actually good. I'm gonna grab a long ruler now, so I can connect these two dots here. And ta-da! Here we go. Align this one, put the finger on it, align the other one. So I found this big fat marker, and I'm going to make sure that I use it in a way that the marking itself is not part of the surface that I want to keep. And that way I know where exactly to cut on this marking, which is basically in the center of it, depending on how wide your saw blade is. Alright, always keep that in mind. Okay, so I only found one clamp, and and the other one is probably in the basement or something. And this is one of the reasons I wanted to make this video, because in most of those DIY videos you see these guys with their CNC lathe and their gigantic workshops with all the tools, and it's all high quality tools. And I thought that this wasn't really how everybody does it and what DIY do-it-yourself means, right? It means always using non-optimal tools, or, you know, making do with what you get or what you find. Yeah, so just one clamp. Let's see how that works out. And I'm going to need something to protect this. A piece of wood I have lying around for purposes like this. I'm going to have to make do by pushing the rest of the plate down with my hand. Let's see if that works. So I picked the saw blade with the smallest teeth. I'm not sure if that's the correct choice, but I'm just going to try and see how it goes. Okay, I'm going to take a look at the cut now before I go on, to make sure I'm not hurting the material or doing something that I'm going to regret afterwards, but it looks okay. It looks okay. So I'm going to continue. Nice. Okay. This plasticky sawdust is pretty horrible, but oh well. Okay, so I took care to give this one here a pretty straight cut, because according to my calculations, I want to use this as a support for the plate afterwards. So be careful you don't damage this more than necessary. And maybe it's gonna work, maybe not. We'll see. So, get an idea if this fits or not. And of course, it doesn't fit. Alright? It's way too large. Because I was too careful with this here. I need to cut that down. This might be a job for a file actually. I'm gonna try a file, I think. So I brought a file and a rasp. And I'm gonna try the file first and see how fast I'm gonna get some material off. Okay, forget it. Let's see if it fits. A bit better. We have about 2 millimeters too much on this side, 3 millimeters too much on this side. So I'm going to see if I can solve this problem with a jigsaw. Okay, due to these adjustment cuts, the edge is now much less straight than on the first cut, which is why it's especially good if you can make the first cut fit. I'm going to grab some sandpaper again. So this time I'm using much more rough sandpaper. This is almost a fit. And you just witnessed my camera die there. Okay, so I did continue a bit, meaning I adjusted the edges so that the plate fits into the cutout. And what I also did is I used this cut-off piece and adjusted its height so that it fits into the cutout and holds the plate at the right height. So what I'm going to do next is cut out 9 roughly equal parts of these, so I can later on glue them to the bottom of this plate here on 9 separate positions. That way it's a good way to distribute the weight, so if you put a heavy object on it, it doesn't like completely bend. Okay, so let's measure that and cut it out. So I've cut out 9 roughly equal parts here, And I wasn't working too precise on these edges, and they don't need to be sanded down perfectly or anything. I just did a very rough cleanup because they will be on the inside and you won't be able to see them in the end. And why I chose these as supports and not, for example, used wooden beams as a support is because these are translucent and they will not hinder the light properly dispersing throughout the entire plate. Now to gluing on the supports. First of all, I will remove one side of the protective foil here. So satisfying. I've removed the protective foil and now I'm going to give the plate a quick swipe, just making sure it's nice and clean. Now it's a bit hard to tell if it's clean because the foil on the other side is still on it and there's a lot of dirt on it, but it looks okay. So I'm just gonna go with it. So now to gluing on these supports, remove the foil. It doesn't really want to be removed. Here we go. Okay, so how to glue them on. I decided to go with a heat gun. My first thought was to use epoxy because this will give a really strong connection, but I think it's maybe a bit overkill actually and it needs a lot of time to dry. So my second thought was to use quick dry epoxy, 5-minute epoxy, but that won't dry up transparently. It's drying up in a greenish, bluish color. I don't want that. So I've been looking for my heat gun and I found it being plugged in, and it has been plugged in for quite a while. So I had to remove some of the glue inside, and I think the trigger mechanism is now broken, so I need to manually push it out. But yeah, we'll just have to make do with this. And I'm gonna glue the plates on with a little bit of distance to the edges, so it won't get wedged in when I put the plate in. Alright, let's see how this goes. And I think it's important not to use too much glue, because I don't really want to have huge blobs, just enough to make it stick. Just like so. Because the thing is, the connection doesn't have to be super strong, okay? It just needs to stay somewhat in place and make sure it's straight, otherwise it won't have the correct height in the end. So make sure it's roughly in a straight angle. Okay, just like so. I'm now going to glue on the remaining 8 parts. Okay, so it seems like the connection of the heat glue is actually stronger than I thought. Okay, so I'm not really sure what's the best way to glue this paper here onto the plate. So, since I'm not sure, I will make a test. I have this leftover piece of the plexiglass and just prepared a small piece of paper. And I wanted to try this Plast model building glue. But I want to see if it dries up in any color or if it damages the paper. So I'm just gonna glue that on. And this backlit foil is a little bit different than normal paper, so I think it's not gonna soak through as much. Just gluing that on, letting it dry and seeing what the result is. I changed the camera angle a bit so you can see better. Now my test piece worked out nicely. I can see through the glue just a little bit through the paper, but I used a lot of this glue on this small piece, so that's a bit much, and also this is much thicker. This will not soak as much, and it also dries up transparently. So I'm going to use this glue, and now in order to avoid any horrible mistakes, I clamped that down and made sure that it stands over 1 or 2 millimeters on each side. So I think I'm just gonna put down some drops of this step by step and roll it down. Let's hope that works. That wipe, gentle wipe just before the glue gets a chance to dry up, because this one dries really quickly. Whew. This seems to work out so far. Now, let's turn this around very carefully and do the same procedure on the other side. I will move the clamps back up just a bit to the area where it's already glued on, so that I won't have an area in the center where there is no glue. The result so far is quite okay, but on some places I noticed that I can lift up the side a bit too much, so we'll just use this small syringe that comes with the glue and see where it fits between the plate and the foil. And wherever that's the case, I'm just going to put some additional glue down. Okay guys, just a quick intermezzo, because I could kick myself in the nuts right now. Usually my projects always have a feature or something that sets them apart, or that you wouldn't expect, or that is just cool, okay? And let's be honest, modifying an IKEA table is nothing nobody else has ever done before. And right after gluing on the foil onto the plate, I had the idea what I could do, and that is to integrate a wireless charging pad between the foil and the plexiglass plate. So how cool would that be? Laying your phone on that blue exploding star and having it charge. Oh well, let's continue. I have an LED strip with a length of 5 meters. Now the way I've come up with to mount these is to make 5 rows. And the central one will probably need to be a bit off center to not get in the way with the supports that I made. But that shouldn't be too much of a problem. And each strip should have a length of 70 centimeters. The total length here is 80, and I want to keep some distance to the edges. So if this is the strip, and this is the strip, you know, just to keep in the grid like this, so I have some distance to the center. I think that should work out fine and look good. Now the next thing to do really is to cut the LED strips and solder them back together, because you know I cannot curve them like that. Okay, that wouldn't work out very well. So we'll cut them and connect them with some cables. Okay, so I need LED strips in the length of 70 centimeters. So I'm just going to quickly mark myself 70 centimeters on the table. It doesn't need to be super exact, because I have to use these cutting points anyways. So let's see, in that case that would be this one. Okay, that worked. Alright, so we have these 4 pads here, red, green, blue and 12 volts. I'm gonna connect all of these. Make sure to connect the right ones. So the way I go about it is I use a Q-tip, just put some flux on it. Just do it like so, and have these helping hands hold that for me. Now I only have 3 colors of cable, so I will use the red one for red and 12 volts. I'll use the brown one for the green connector, and I use black for blue. So I'm gonna need, I think 10 centimeters per cable should be good. So I'll just cut off 10 centimeters. unisolate that. Just maybe 4 millimeters or something. The pads are pretty long, so we can unisolate actually quite a bit. That's okay. Turn the soldering iron on, of course, and I'll set it to maybe 400 degrees. I don't want to go too hot because I don't know how much heat this plastic can withstand. Stop! Message from future Yuri. Soldering at 400 degrees is too hot. The recommended soldering temperature for LED strips is around 330 degrees Celsius or 650 degrees Fahrenheit. Otherwise you may damage your LED strip. Keep that in mind. Go on. Dip the cable in flux. Prep the solder here. I'm going to bring that a bit closer. I hope you can see it in the camera. And I'm just going to work myself top to bottom and connect these. Okay, it's at 400. I'm just going to burn off a bit of the flux here again. And now I'm going to pre-solder the cable here. Now, I'm not really good at soldering or electronics. I just recently started to make my first steps in that direction. So many of you will probably see this and have a lot to criticize about it, and that is okay. I'm still learning, but not being an expert at something shouldn't hold me back on completing my projects. Just put a dip of that on there. A bit more solder on here as well. So now that everything has been pre-soldered, I'll just twist that a bit, and now I'm gonna try, and I'm really bad at this as you can see, and here we go. Now this doesn't really look like one blob, it looks like a layer on top of another one, so I'm gonna go over it another time. I'm gonna have to clean the tip now first, I think. Better. And try a second time. And I'm sometimes starting to shake a bit when I'm doing very fine things. Just give this a tug and see if it holds, and it seems to hold okay-ish. I mean, this is not going to be under huge amounts of stress, so I'm not stressing out over it either. And that was a dad joke, I'm just aware. And that should be okay. Test this as well. I think that's good enough. So now I'm going to work my way down all the 4 pads and then repeat that until I have 5 strips of 70 centimeters. So this is my first connection, and as you can see my soldering looks horrible. I've unisolated too much, and I think I've also soldered too hot because there were some brownish burn marks. But what's important is that these connections are not bridging, that means touching each other, and that they have a good fit and the cables don't come off easily, so that should work. This is where things start to become really simple. Fortunately, these LED strips come with an adhesive stripe on the back, and all we need to do is now glue them onto the base table here. I made myself some markings to get them in the right position, and that really shouldn't be too much of an issue. Now usually these kind of adhesives need some force pushing down to really stick good. I mean, don't use excessive force, right? You don't need to hammer it with a hammer. Just give it a good push, you know, Make sure you don't push on the LEDs or other fragile pieces. What I'm going to do now is drill a hole here, so I can make a test if the remote control works, if the receiver is on the inside or if it doesn't get a signal, because I'm not sure about that. It needs to be slightly bigger. Oh yeah, that seems to work. Nice! Okay, that's cool. That means I can install a receiver on the inside and it won't be looking ugly somewhere on the outside. Always test, don't make assumptions. Much better. So I'm gonna plug it in and I'm gonna put it back together. I'm gonna use this, you know, these cheap things that come with electronics that tie the cables. That looks better. It's not a work of art, I know. And I think I can eliminate a bit more. Our table is finished! So this is how it finally looks in my room. I'm really happy with the overall looks and also how the lights illuminate objects that are on the table, which is especially interesting with drinks, which are also translucent by themselves, but also decorative objects like the starfighter I put on top here. Overall, I'm very happy. Now, on to the resume. If I would rate myself for this project, I think I would rate it with a C. Now, why? First of all, overall I'm satisfied with the outcome. But there are some mistakes in craftsmanship and some learnings that I had that I could do better next time, like, you know, making the edges a little bit nicer. Also, if you look closely and you turn up the colors all the way, which I did now, you can see some of the supports shining through. And also, I can't see them now, but I did see some spots where you could see the glue. Just, you know, a little shadow basically coming through. So this is really not perfect, okay? But as I said initially, it's a couch table. I'm gonna put stuff on it, okay? Now, secondly, I went with the cheaper option for this backlit foil. And there's two problems with that. It's not self-adhesive, which would have made things a lot easier. And also, it doesn't have a coating on top, a protective coating. So while it's more plasticky than papery, I'm not sure how it will react to alcoholic substances or coffee or something like that that might get spilled. So I think I'm gonna have to get some nice of these little plates that you put under your glasses or your cups, just to give it a bit more longevity. I also thought about painting it with varnish, but I'm not really sure if that would work out also well. And the last thing and most important thing is that I could have made the wireless charger here in the center, and that would have been super cool. It would have been pretty unique, and I think that's really a missed opportunity. And also, all the colors you have available with these LEDs, with this motif, they all work, because, you know, you can give space a ton of different hues and it will always look like space, okay? It's gonna be tougher if you pick a landscape, you know, and you have a mountain and there's no red mountains, okay? So it will look strange. But this motif actually I think it looks really good, and also it works with the whole composition itself, and also with the available lighting methods. And of course, we have a party mode. And I'm gonna play around with this thing for the rest of the day probably now. But I'm pretty satisfied, really. Thank you for watching, guys and girls. If you learned something new today, or if you just enjoyed the video, please consider leaving a like and also subscribing to the channel, as these two metrics will be my main indicators to find out what kind of content you guys would like to see in the future. I'm also very keen to hearing your questions and feedback down in the comment section. Stay nerdy and see you next time.